All right, listeners, buckle up. We're diving deep into the book of Genesis, the one that kicks off the whole Bible.
The one that starts it all.
Yep. And we're focusing on those first few chapters, straight from the text. Creation, family drama, murder, curses. We might even find some divine real estate deals in there.
Oh yeah, there's a lot packed in there.
So we're starting with Adam and Eve, already in the Garden of Eden, with their two sons, Cain, the farmer, and Abel, the shepherd. And things get a little tricky, when it's time for offerings to God.
Right. That's one of those details that might seem small, but it actually, it opens up a ton of questions.
Iris.
God likes Abel's offering of livestock, but Cain's offering from his crops is, rejected. Why is that? What does that say about their relationship with God, or even what does it tell us about God?
Yeah, good question. I mean, was it the offering itself? Or was it more about, the heart behind it? Maybe Cain just wasn't really into it.
That's a common thought, and it makes sense if you think about the culture back then. Offerings in ancient cultures, they weren't just about giving something to a god. They were about recognizing their power, thanking them, and trying to get on their good side. So the offering itself, the effort, it all mattered.
So maybe when Abel offered up his best livestock, it showed a deeper respect or devotion.
Yeah, exactly. It could be seen as him putting God first, recognizing that this is like a sacred thing.
And that brings us to, the first murder. Cain, super jealous, kills his brother Abel, and then God confronts him. And his answer is, it's chilling. Am I my brother's keeper? That's a question that still feels really relevant, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Cain trying to dodge responsibility. Totally something we still see today. But the fact that God even asks the question implies that we do have a responsibility to each other, right? Like it's inherent.
It's like that question isn't just for Cain, it's for all of us.
Exactly. It makes us face the fact that we're connected and we have obligations to each other.
Okay, so what about God's punishment for Cain? Cursed to wander, but also protected with a mark that stops anyone else from hurting him. That's pretty intense, right? It almost seems contradictory.
It definitely is complex. On one hand, he's exiled, alone, away from his land and everyone he knows. But on the other hand, God protects him. Like, even though he sinned, he's still valuable.
So it's like God is acknowledging how serious Cain's actions were, but also that there needs to be some justice, but also making sure the violence stops there.
Exactly. It brings up all these big questions about justice, mercy, and if redemption's even possible.
Okay, so Cain takes off, wanders off, and he ends up settling in a new place. His descendants get busy developing skills like building cities, playing music, working with metal. Sounds like civilization is starting, but then there's this disturbing thing.
Oh, right. Lamech, a descendant of Cain. He brags about killing someone and says his revenge would be way worse than Cain's. Like 77 times worse.
Wow. That's intense. Feels like the violence is just getting worse, like it's becoming normal.
Yeah, it's disturbing, for sure. Makes you wonder if humanity learns from its mistakes or just keeps making them over and over again.
Right. And then amidst all of this, we have Seth, another son born to Adam and Eve after Abel.
Seth is key. He's the ancestor of Noah, which means he's the ancestor of, everyone. It's almost like a reset, a new beginning, a fresh start after all the violence with Cain's line.
So maybe humanity does get a second chance.
Could be. It also shows how important family line and legacy are in the Bible.
Speaking of lineage, we get that table of nations in Genesis, basically a giant family tree tracking the descendants of Noah's sons. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It's like a who's who of ancient civilizations. The Philistines are there, the Canaanites, even Eber, the ancestor of the Hebrews.
That table really is setting the stage for the whole rest of the Bible. It shows where all these groups and regions came from, how they all link back to Noah and the flood. It's interesting too because some of them, like the Canaanites, they're going to be important later on in the story of the Israelites.
So it's not just a random list, it's like foreshadowing future conflicts and alliances.
Exactly. And it reinforces the idea that everyone is connected, even if those connections are, full of conflict.
And then we meet Abram, later known as Abraham. God tells him, leave your home, go to Canaan, and I'll make you into a great nation. Things are getting really interesting now. God makes a covenant with Abram, promises him land and tons of descendants. Why are covenants such a big deal?
Covenants were huge back then. They're serious agreements, usually with sacrifices and oaths, and they basically created a strong bond between two parties. In this case, God's making a promise to Abram and all his descendants, a promise that will shape the whole future of the Israelites.
It's not just a casual agreement, it's like the bedrock of their relationship.
Exactly. It's the basis of the relationship between God and the Israelites, a relationship built on promises and obligations.
But it's not all easy for Abram. He and his wife Sarai, later Sarah, end up in a tough spot in Egypt. To protect himself, Abram says Sarai is his sister, which, well, you can imagine the problems that causes.
Yeah, that story really makes you think about Abram's faith, and if he's really a good guy, he's willing to put his wife in danger to save himself. It reminds us that even the heroes in the Bible, they messed up sometimes. They're complex people.
They make mistakes, they struggle with their faith, they have real problems, makes them relatable in a way.
Absolutely. Makes their stories even more interesting.
So speaking of interesting, let's talk about Abram's nephew, Lot. He decides to live in Sodom, which, has a reputation. He gets caught in a war and taken prisoner.
But then Abram steps up, shows how brave and loyal he is. He gets his men together and rescues Lot. And get this, he won't take any reward from the king of Sodom.
What? Seriously, why not? I mean, he risked his life. He deserves something.
It's weird, right? But it says a lot about Abram. He doesn't care about money or power. He trusts God, and he won't break that trust for, worldly stuff.
It's like he's showing what he values. His faith is the real reward.
Exactly. And it shows how different he is from the corrupt leaders of Sodom.
And then we have this mysterious guy, Melchizedek. He's a king and a priest, and he just pops up out of nowhere to bless Abram. Who was this guy?
Melchizedek is one of those figures that people have been debating about forever. Some think he was like Jesus before Jesus. Others think he just represents like a higher level of priesthood. He appears and then vanishes, which just adds to the mystery.
It's like we're seeing a glimpse of something deeper, more mysterious.
Right, and it raises questions about priesthood, the power of blessings, that whole connection between humans and the divine.
Okay, back to the covenant. God renews his promise to Abram, who's now Abraham, and the sign of the covenant, circumcision.
Circumcision was pretty common in ancient cultures. It was often about belonging and being clean. Here, it's a physical sign of the covenant between God and Abraham and all his descendants. A visible sign of their commitment to this special relationship.
So it's more than a ritual, it's about who they are as God's chosen people.
Exactly. It sets them apart, makes them different from other nations.
And then God promises Abraham and Sarah that they'll have a son, even though they're old. Sarah laughs when she hears this, and, well, can you blame her?
Totally normal reaction.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't laugh when something seems impossible? But her laughter also shows that tension between what humans can do and what God can do.
And of course, they name their son Isaac, which means he laughs. A constant reminder of that moment of disbelief.
It's a cool example of how God can even use our doubts and limitations to do what he wants to do.
And then things take a darker turn again with Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham actually tries to bargain with God, asks him to spare the cities if there are enough good people living there.
That back and forth between them tells us a lot about God. He's not just some distant, unfeeling being. He listens to Abraham, and he even negotiates about the fate of these cities. It shows that prayer can actually make a difference, even in what God decides.
It's like they're talking to each other as equals, even though, obviously, they're not.
Right, and that's pretty remarkable. It suggests a close, open relationship. But
it turns out there aren't enough righteous people, and God destroys the cities with, fire and brimstone.
The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, people have been arguing about that for centuries. Makes you think about God's justice, what happens when we sin, that whole tension between God's mercy and his judgment.
It's a reminder that our actions have consequences, for us and for everyone else.
Right. It also makes us think about what we consider good and bad, and if we're held accountable for what we do.
And before we move on, we can't forget Hagar and Ishmael. Sarah can't have children, so she tells Abraham to have a child with her maidservant, Hagar.
That's a messy situation full of jealousy and tension. Hagar gives birth to Ishmael, but Sarah gets more and more resentful, and in the end, she kicks Hagar and Ishmael out, sends them off into the wilderness.
It's sad to think about what that must have been like for Hagar, to be sent away with her child not knowing what would happen.
Definitely. But even then, God doesn't forget them. He appears to Hagar and promises her that Ishmael will have many descendants and become a great nation.
So even when people are cruel and things are broken, God's still there, and he keeps his promises.
Exactly. And that promise to Hagar is important because it hints at the future conflict between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael, a conflict that we still see today.
So this whole family drama is actually setting the stage for conflicts that will last for generations.
It really shows how the choices we make, even within our families, can have huge ripple effects.
And then, miracle of miracles, Sarah gets pregnant and gives birth to Isaac. God's promise comes true.
Isaac's birth is a huge turning point. It proves that God keeps his promises, even when they seem impossible. It also shows us divine providence, the idea that God's working behind the scenes, making things happen the way he wants.
It's a message of hope that even when things seem impossible, miracles can still happen.
Right, and makes us think about faith, about believing in something we can't even fully grasp.
But the story doesn't end there. Then we come to, well, maybe one of the toughest parts of the whole Bible, the binding of Isaac. God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son, the son he waited so long for. It's a test of his faith. I mean, what can you even say about that?
People have been wrestling with that story for centuries. Why would God ask such a thing? What does it say about Abraham's obedience? It really makes us face the limits of what we can understand and just how paradoxical faith can be.
It's definitely a hard one to wrap your head around. Abraham does what he's told, but right as he's about to sacrifice Isaac, an angel stops him, and there's a ram caught in the thicket that's offered as a substitute.
That ram is a powerful symbol of atonement, a substitute for the original sacrifice. And it points to the ultimate sacrifice of Jesus who would die for the sins of humanity.
It connects this ancient story to the very heart of Christianity.
Right. It makes us ask about the nature of sacrifice, what atonement means, and how far God is willing to go to redeem us.
So then we move on to Isaac. It's time to find him a wife. Abraham sends his servant back to his homeland to find the right woman. And that journey is full of, well, God's fingerprints all over it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The servant prays by the well. Then Rebecca appears, and she's exactly who they were looking for. It all points to divine providence. God's involved in everything, even finding a wife.
Like God's playing matchmaker, making sure the right people meet at the right time.
Right. It also shows how important lineage and tradition are. Abraham wants Isaac to marry someone from his own people. He wants to keep his family line and his faith strong.
And then Isaac and Rebecca have twins, Jacob and Esau, and these two are total opposites.
Yeah, their different personalities are going to lead to a lot of drama.
Yeah.
Jacob, the younger one, he's clever, ambitious. Esau's more impulsive, focused on what he can see and touch. This sets the stage for everything that's about to happen for their family and for the whole Israelite nation.
We're seeing the beginnings of future conflicts and victories right there in that family.
Exactly. And it reminds us that even the biggest stories, the ones that change nations and history, they often start with something as simple as two siblings who can't get along.
So much drama. And that's where we'll leave off for now.
We've covered a lot. Creation, the first murder, covenants, complicated families, and how God keeps his promises.
Welcome back. Last time, we left off with Isaac and Rebekah's twin sons, Jacob and Esau. And these two, they were total opposites. And you can guess that led to some serious family drama.
Yeah, it's like a soap opera, ancient world style.
Yeah.
Rivalry, lies, ambition. You can just feel the tension.
So Jacob tricks Esau out of his birthright. Then he has to run for it, heads to his uncle Laban's to get away from Esau's, let's say, anger. But this journey, it's more than just running away, right?
Oh yeah, you got it. Jacob's journey is full of those God moments, Dreams, visions, wrestling with angels. It's a time when he changes, wrestles with his past, and figures out who he really is.
One of the most famous scenes is that dream with the ladder going up to heaven with angels going up and down. What's that all about?
It's a powerful image, right? The connection between heaven and earth, between us and God. It's like God is saying, I'm here, I'm involved, even in your individual lives. And don't forget, this is where God makes those covenant promises again, the ones he made to Abraham, but now they're for Jacob and his descendants too.
So even though Jacob messed up, God's still there for him, still can keep those promises. Kind of reassuring, isn't it?
It is. It shows that God's grace and faithfulness are there, even for the people who make mistakes, who get off track. It's a theme you see throughout the Bible. Redemption, second chances, the possibility of changing, even after you fail.
Jacob ends up staying with his uncle Laban for 20 years, works for him, marries his two daughters, Leah and Rachel. And the family dynamics, whoa, they are wild. Sisters fighting, handmaids having kids, love triangles. It's hard to keep track.
It is a mess. But all these complicated relationships, they show what family life was really like way back then. Polygamy was common, and having multiple wives and concubines. That created a lot of tension and drama. But even with all that, God's plan is still going forward. Jacob has 12 sons with these women, and they'll become the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel, the foundation of the whole nation.
So even with all the drama and craziness, it's all part of something bigger, a divine plan unfolding across generations.
Exactly. It's like looking beyond what's right in front of you and seeing the big picture, the long-term effects of what's happening. Think of it like a tapestry, each thread adding to the whole design.
But eventually, Jacob decides it's time to head back to Canaan, even though he knows Esau's still there. And get this. On his way back, he wrestles with God. Can you imagine?
That's one of the most mysterious stories in Genesis, no doubt. Jacob's alone at night, wrestling with, well, we don't really know for sure. But in the end, he gets a new name, Israel, which means he struggles with God.
So it's not just a physical fight, it's a spiritual one. It's about faith and doubt, about his own limits and God's power. And that name change, Israel, it's almost like a badge of honor, something he earned through that struggle.
Yeah, exactly. Shows how Jacob's changed. He realizes he needs God, and he understands his place in God's plan better. And it sets the stage for who his descendants will be, the Israelites.
It's like a reminder that sometimes the toughest fights, the ones that leave you hurting, are the ones that shape you the most, bring you closer to God.
That's a great way to put it. I think we can all relate to that. We all have those moments where we wrestle with God, when we doubt and question things. But those are the moments when we can discover our true strength and realize that we need something bigger than ourselves.
And now we come to Joseph, Jacob's favorite son. And this story, man, it has everything. Siblings competing, betrayal, slavery, prison, and in the end, forgiveness and redemption. It's a Hollywood movie waiting to happen.
It is a wild ride. Joseph is Rachel's son, the wife Jacob loved most, and he gets a special coat, showing how much his dad favors him. Of course, his brothers are jealous, and what do? Get rid of him.
They throw him in a pit, then they sell him to some traders passing by. Talk about a bad day. I can't imagine how scared and lost he must have felt.
It's awful. Just a terrible betrayal. Shows how destructive envy and resentment can be. But even in that dark moment, there's a little bit of hope. Joseph is taken to Egypt, and even with all the hardship, he keeps his faith, keeps his integrity.
And guess what? He ends up working for Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials. He works his way up, proves he's capable and can be trusted. But then another crazy turn of events. Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him. He refuses, so she says he attacked her, and bam, he's thrown in prison. Seriously, when is this guy gonna get a break?
It shows that even when you try to do the right thing, bad things can still happen. You can still face injustice and hardship. But it's important to see that even in prison, Joseph's faith never goes away. He keeps trusting God, and his true character shines through, even in the worst place.
And that's what gets him out, right? He interprets the dreams of two other prisoners. Then Pharaoh has these crazy dreams, and Joseph gets called in to figure them out.
Exactly. Joseph's ability to interpret dreams, he says it's God helping him, is what makes him special. He doesn't just interpret Pharaoh's dreams, which are about a famine coming. He also comes up with a plan to save Egypt from starving.
So this guy, sold as a slave, falsely accused, thrown in prison, ends up as the second most powerful person in Egypt. Now that's a plot twist.
It is. It's a complete turnaround. And it's all because of Joseph's faith, his wisdom, and his ability to see God's plan even when things are really rough. Like that saying, God works in mysterious ways.
And then, the moment we've all been waiting for. Joseph sees his brothers again. It's been years, and they have no idea that this powerful Egyptian official is their brother.
Oh man, so much tension in that moment. Joseph knows who they are, but they don't recognize him. He tests them, makes them face what they did, admit their guilt.
And the emotions just keep coming. He tells them who he is: shock, disbelief, joy, regret. Gives me chills thinking about it.
It's such a powerful moment of forgiveness.
Yeah.
Joseph could have easily gotten revenge, but he chooses to forgive. He sees that God used all the pain and hardship to bring about something good.
And then he brings his whole family to Egypt, settles them in Goshen, saves them from the famine.
Moving to Egypt, that changes everything. Abraham's descendants, who were promised Canaan, they're now living in Egypt. It sets the stage for what comes next: slavery and the rise of Moses.
So before we get to the last part of our Genesis deep dive, what are some big takeaways for our listeners? What should they be thinking about?
Throughout all these stories, we see how important family is, both the good and the bad. We see how complex people are, how we can be good and bad, and how our choices have consequences. And maybe the most important thing, God is faithful. He always keeps his promises, even when it seems impossible.
It's amazing how these ancient stories still resonate today. They give us insight into our relationships, struggles, hopes. They remind us that even when things are chaotic and uncertain, God's at work, putting together a story of redemption and hope.
It's a message that brings comfort and encouragement, no matter what we're facing. We're not alone in our struggles, and even in the darkest times, there's always hope for a brighter future.
We're back, ready for the final part of our Genesis deep dive. And things are about to get pretty intense. Last we left off, Jacob and his fam were settling into Egypt thanks to Joseph, becoming super powerful. But we know from history, this peace isn't going to last.
Right, their time in Egypt is kind of setting the stage for some tough times ahead, for oppression that'll really shape who they become as a people. But before we get there are these crucial moments in the lives of these patriarchs, moments that say a lot about them and what's coming for their descendants.
Okay, so let's start with Jacob. He's getting old, time to pass on those blessings and his whole legacy to his sons. But there's this one part that always gets me. Remember when he blesses Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh?
Oh yeah, that's where things get interesting. Jacob crosses his hands on purpose, puts his right hand on Ephraim, the younger son, and his left hand on Manasseh, the older one. He's totally going against the tradition, putting Ephraim ahead of his big brother.
It's like he's saying, I know this isn't how we usually do things, but I see something special in Ephraim.
Exactly. And this blessing, it's not just about those two boys. It's a prophecy, foreshadowing how important the tribe of Ephraim will become. And they do play a big role in Israel's history.
So it's like peeking into the future, seeing hints of what's to come.
Right. It also shows us that God often works in unexpected ways, choosing the younger son, the underdog, to do what he wants. Like, don't underestimate the people who seem small or unimportant.
And then there's that powerful scene where Jacob blesses all 12 of his sons. Each blessing is unique to them, like he's looking into their souls and seeing their potential.
That scene in Genesis 49, it's amazing, like poetry and prophecy all in one. It gives us a glimpse of each tribe, their strengths and weaknesses, what they'll achieve, the struggles they'll face.
And one of the most well-known blessings is for Judah, where he's compared to a lion. The scepter shall not depart from Judah until he comes to whom it belongs.
Powerful imagery, right? Many people see it as a prophecy about the Messiah, pointing to a future king from the tribe of Judah who will rule all the nations.
So we're talking King David and ultimately Jesus, right?
Exactly. This is setting up the tribe of Judah as the royal line, where the Messiah will come from. It connects this ancient story to the very heart of Christianity.
Amazing to think that these words from so long ago still impact how we understand faith and history today.
It shows how powerful the Bible is, how it speaks to people across time and cultures, offering insights into being human and God's plan.
And then we come to the deaths of Jacob and Joseph. Both of them die in Egypt, but they make their sons promise to bury them back in Canaan, the promised land. Why was that so important? Why not just bury them in Egypt where they spent their last years?
It's a strong statement about their faith and their longing. It shows they never stopped believing in God's promise, never stopped believing that Canaan was their true home, even though they didn't get to fully experience it.
So it's not just about where they're buried, but about their spiritual connection to the land, about hoping for a future that goes beyond their own lives.
Exactly. And that longing for the promised land, it becomes a driving force for the Israelites later on. Their escape from Egypt, wandered in the wilderness, conquering Canaan, it's all because of that promise to their ancestors, that dream of a place where they can finally be free and build their own nation.
It's like they're planting a seed of hope that won't fully bloom for generations.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and I think that's a key takeaway from Genesis. Even when things are tough, even when your dreams seem impossible, even if you don't see them happen in your lifetime, you can hold on to hope. Trust that God's working behind the scenes, doing what he needs to do to make things happen.
That's a really powerful message, and it feels so relevant to us today. I mean, we all go through difficult times. We all have dreams that seem out of reach. But these stories remind us that even in the darkest moments, even when we can't see a way out, we can trust God. He's bigger than our problems, and he always keeps his promises.
Well said. I think that's a great way to wrap up our Genesis deep dive.
We've explored so much. Creation, humanity messing up, the covenant, family drama, forgiveness, and that hope that never goes away. We didn't just retell the stories, we talked about the big questions they raise. Questions about faith, purpose, justice, mercy, the meaning of life.
And those are questions that everyone listening can keep thinking about, exploring, wrestling with in their own lives. Genesis isn't just an old book. It's alive, still speaking to us today, giving us wisdom, guidance, and inspiring us on our own journeys.
So to everyone listening, as we finish up this deep dive, keep reading, keep asking questions, keep searching for the deeper truths in these old stories.
And remember, Genesis is just the start. It's the foundation for this epic story that goes through the whole Bible, a story about redemption, hope, and God's never-ending love.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through Genesis. We hope you enjoyed it.